I'm 92 years old, still in my own house. My son reached for my grocery bag last week. Before I'd set it down good, on the counter there. Didn't look at me first, just reached for it. Had his phone still in his other hand, I remember, sort of juggling everything. I let him take it. Funny thing is, that's a small thing. Shouldn't stick with a man the way it has. But it's stuck with me all week, if I'm honest. People ask how. Used to just say good genes and leave it at that. My father made it to 89, so I don't really say that anymore, though. Haven't in a while, come to think of it. There was a fella I knew from the VFW hall, Walt. Sat 2 stools down from me at coffee most Saturday mornings, 20 years, or near enough. Always had some story about his time in the Pacific. Half of it I think he made up over the years, and I always liked that about him. If you can believe that's what comes to mind first, out of everything. His wife passed the same year mine did, and his kids moved him in with them not too long after. Nothing wrong in that. His kids loved him, I want to say that. I saw him again, about a year on. Was at his son's place, matter of fact. Little kitchen off the garage. I remember that for some reason, and not much else about it. He was pouring his coffee. Now he always used to just fill the cup. Straight up, never gave it a thought. Same as reaching for the sugar. This time he stopped about halfway. Looked over at his son first. I didn't think anything of it right then. Standing right there with him, and I didn't think one thing of it. Honestly, we got to talking about something else entirely. Couldn't even tell you what now. Thought about it plenty since, though. Couldn't tell you why. Exactly. Still can't. Not fully. Went home that day. Made my own coffee, same as I always do. And I don't know what got into me, I just stood there a second. Hand on the handle, coffee going cold in it, and I hadn't moved. Hadn't done that before. Do it with the curtain now, too. Come to think of it. Every morning. Both hands. I catch myself doing it lately. Couldn't tell you when that started. Or why it matters so much. The hands and all, but it does. So let me start where it really starts. The curtain. Every morning, every single one. Don't think I've missed more than a handful in all the years I've lived in this house. I get up and cross the room and open that curtain myself. Both hands. Same spot every time. Pull it toward me. Then, out to the side. And I couldn't tell you why that particular way, except that I always have. 92 years old, and it's still the first thing I do most mornings, before I've hardly got my eyes open good. My daughter tried to get me one of those automatic ones a few years back, the kind that opens on a timer, so you don't have to bother getting up for it. Ordered the thing off her computer without even asking me first. Showed up one Sunday all excited to put it in. I told her no. Told her to take it back. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind a little. Over a curtain. Maybe I had. Couldn't have explained it to her that day, even if she'd asked me straight out to. Told her it was about the light. That's what I always said, if anybody asked. Like watching the yard wake up before I get on with anything else. That was true enough, far as it went. Always did like the light. I remember standing there one morning, not long after she'd tried to give me that thing, opening the curtain the regular way, and that box still sitting there, unopened by the door. Felt almost foolish, being that stubborn over a piece of fabric. Didn't stop me, though. Some mornings my hands don't want to cooperate much, I'll be honest with you. Takes me a beat longer than it used to. Doesn't matter. I do it anyway. Funny, I was out there one morning, must have been not long after seeing Walt, hand right on the curtain, about to pull it, and for just a second I thought of him. Standing in his son's kitchen with that coffee cup, stopped halfway. Couldn't tell you why the two things connected in my head. Not even the same thing, not really. But there it was. I don't rightly know when I started paying attention to it after that. The curtain, I mean. Started noticing myself doing it. My own hands doing the thing they'd always done, and me actually watching them do it for once. I thought, for the longest while, that was the whole of it. Get up. Cross the room. Light's nice. Day handled. It wasn't. There was more sitting underneath that curtain than I understood for years, and it took losing my socks one bad morning, of all things, before I found the rest of it. That's one. Which brings me to the kitchen counter, and something I never talked about with anybody until fairly recently, mostly because I never noticed I was doing it until I'd already been doing it for years. I stretch a little before I even reach for the kettle. Roll my shoulders. Reach toward my toes, or wherever my toes have gotten off to these days, which is a joke I make every single morning to an empty kitchen. And it still gets a laugh out of me every time, which either says something charming about my sense of humor or something concerning about how much time I spend alone. I've decided not to examine that one too closely. For a long while, I told myself this was simply an old man being careful with an old body. Nothing more complicated than that. The kind of thing you do because you've read somewhere that it's sensible, and you've stopped questioning why. Then I remembered a particular winter, 15 years back now, when I woke up so stiff, I genuinely could not get my own socks on. Had to call my daughter to come do it for me before the sun was properly up. I sat on the edge of that bed, sock in my hand, feeling about as low as I've felt in my whole life. Not because of the sock itself, because of what the sock meant, that I might be somebody who needed help now, first thing, every morning, for however long I had left. That's when the stretching actually started, and it was never really exercise. It was a question I decided to ask my own body every single morning before I asked it to do anything real. What have I got to work with today? Ask gently, on my own terms, before the day could go and answer that question for me the hard way. The way it had with that sock. I figured that was the whole story. Ask the body a fair question. Get moving. Day handled once again. But there was a second layer sitting underneath that one, and it took me years longer to notice it than I'd like to admit. My mother used to stand at her own kitchen sink and roll her shoulders slow, staring out at nothing in particular, and as a boy I always assumed she was simply tired. I understand now she was doing exactly what I do at my own counter, decades later. Checking in. Which means this habit was never really mine alone to begin with. It got handed to me quietly, without either of us ever giving it a name, and I only recognized the inheritance standing in her exact posture. In my own kitchen. An old man myself by then. That's two. The next one snuck up on me more than any of the others, if I'm honest. By this point in the morning, the coffee's finally dripping, and I sit down at this same table I've had for over 40 years and pull the crossword toward me. In pen, which my daughter still considers reckless of me, and which I still consider none of her business. I always assumed people hearing about the crossword would think it was about keeping the mind sharp. Let them think it. That's not why I started, and I've never bothered correcting anybody, mostly because the real reason took me a long while to admit even to myself. I started because my wife sat right here every single morning of our married life, with her own section of the paper. Quiet. Content. Present in a way that didn't require conversation to feel like company. After she passed, this table went so quiet, I genuinely could not stand it. I needed something in my hands at this exact spot, or the empty chair across from me got too loud to sit near. I told myself that explained the crossword completely. Something to fill a silence she'd left behind. A small daily ritual of missing her. It wasn't the whole reason, though, and I only discovered that on the mornings I happened to skip it. Something in me feels unfinished on those mornings, and it has nothing to do with missing her that particular day. Some days I hardly think of her at all until I sit down here and remember. It's that I've come to expect one thing waiting for me at this table, every single morning. That asks nothing of me and needs nothing from me in return. It's simply mine, ready, unchanged from yesterday. Somewhere along the way, without my noticing the transition happening, grief turned quietly into a reason to get up in the morning. Which is not a thing anybody warns you is possible when you're standing at a funeral, wondering how you'll survive the week, let alone the decades after it. That's three. Which brings me, finally, to the part I got wrong the longest, and the one I'm least likely to explain correctly even now. After the coffee's poured, I make a phone call. Doesn't much matter who to. Some mornings, my daughter. Some mornings, my son. Some mornings, an old friend from church I've known most of my adult life. One of the very few left who remembers me as a young man rather than an old one. I took it for granted that this was the simplest of the five. Staying in touch. Nothing complicated underneath it at all. I even felt a little guilty about it for a stretch of years, calling people so early, worried I was bothering somebody over nothing important. I mentioned that to Frances once, a woman who'd lived 2 doors down from me for the better part of 30 years before she passed, and she gave me one of those looks she reserved for opinions she considered particularly foolish. "You're not bothering anybody," she said. "You're reminding somebody every single morning that you're still part of their life. That's not nothing. Some days, that's the whole thing holding a person together." I didn't understand what she meant by that. Not really. Not until a bad stretch a few years back, after a fall that laid me up longer than I liked to admit to anybody who asked. I let a whole week go by without calling a single soul, too tired, too out of sorts to bother reaching for the phone. I remember that week with a clarity that surprises me even now. Long, gray the days felt like they were happening somewhere off at a distance from me, not right here in my own kitchen where they were supposed to be unfolding. That's when I finally understood what those morning calls had actually been doing all along. It was never really about staying in touch, whatever that phrase even means. It was about being expected. There's a particular difference between simply being alone in a house and being someone whose voice somebody, somewhere, is waiting to hear that morning. I hadn't understood how large that difference was until I went a week without it and felt the exact shape of its absence. That's 4. I thought that was the hardest lesson of the bunch. Turned out the next one surprised me most, and it doesn't even look like anything at all, if you're watching from outside. After all of it, the window, the stretch, the crossword, the call, I sit for one more minute before I let the actual day get started on me. No radio playing, nothing in my hands, just me, sitting in my own kitchen, doing what looks to anybody watching like absolutely nothing at all. There's an old clock on the wall. My wife picked it up somewhere. A yard sale, most likely. 40 years back now, and most mornings, that's the loudest thing in the room. I just let it be. Some mornings there's a bird works the feeder outside that same window, and I'll watch it a while without really watching it, if that makes any sense at all. That's 5. Same as the other 4, just quieter. Nobody sees you do this one. Doesn't make it count for less. And in that minute, without ever quite meaning to, I find myself running back over what I just did. Open the curtain myself. Asked my body a fair question. Sat with something waiting only for me. Heard my own voice, out loud, talking to somebody glad to hear it. For years I believed those were 5 entirely separate habits, with no real thread connecting one to the next. I was wrong about that too. Took me the longest of anything to figure out, if I'm honest. Mostly because the answer was too close to notice. The way you can't see your own face without a mirror held up in front of you. That quiet minute at the end is where I finally notice, without ever quite putting it into so many words, that none of that morning happened to me. I chose every single piece of it. The same as I chose it yesterday, and the day before that, and going back now further than I can properly count. The curtain was never just about the light. The stretching was never just about old bones. The crossword was never just about a quiet table. And the phone calls were never just about staying in touch. Even that last one, sitting still a minute with nothing in my hands, that was never nothing either. 5 different ways, near as I can figure, of protecting one single thing, and I only found the right word for that thing very recently, turning it over in my mind at this very table. The ability to keep choosing my own life. Morning after morning, in pieces so small nobody watching would think to call them anything at all, until one day, if you're fortunate enough to get there, you look back across 92 years and realize those small pieces were the whole thing, quietly, the entire time. I still think of Walt sometimes. On the mornings I don't much feel like getting up and opening that curtain myself. It gets me moving anyway. I still think of Frances too, gone herself now, who saw things in me before I ever saw them in myself, and had the good grace to say so out loud at exactly the right moments, which I've come to understand is its own particular kind of gift. Mostly, though, I think about this kitchen, and this particular quiet, which used to feel to me like proof of everything I'd lost. It doesn't feel that way to me anymore. Without ever quite deciding it should, that same quiet turned into something else entirely. Now it just feels like mine. If one of these 5 sounds like something you already do: the curtain, the stretch, the crossword, the call, or just sitting quiet a minute, I'd like to know which one. Tell me down in the comments. And if you don't mind sitting with an old man's stories a while longer, you're welcome to subscribe. I'd be glad to have you here.